I never imagined I'd become the kind of woman who could destroy what seemed like a perfect marriage over something so stupid. But here I am, sitting alone in my new apartment, writing all of this while my kids spend the weekend with their dad. My name is Natalie. I'm 32 years old, and one careless decision was enough to tear apart almost everything good I had in my life. Ethan and I had been married for 7 years. We had 2 beautiful kids together. Sophie was 6 and Liam was 4. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we had built a comfortable life. We owned a cozy 3-bedroom house in a nice neighborhood, and we had worked incredibly hard for everything we had. Ethan coached the kids' baseball team, and he never missed one of Sophie's dance performances. He remembered birthdays, anniversaries, and even the tiny things most people would probably forget. If he stopped at the store, he'd come home with my favorite snacks without me even asking. He was the kind of husband my friends used to envy. Even after years together, he still opened the car door for me and occasionally slipped little notes into my lunch bag. For a long time, I genuinely believed I had hit the jackpot. Ethan and I met in college, got married shortly after graduation, and built our adult lives together from the ground up. Those first few years were incredible. We traveled whenever we could, spent weekends with friends, and sometimes made plans at the last possible second just because we felt like it. Then we had kids, and our entire life changed. Don't misunderstand me. I love my children more than anything in this world. But somewhere along the way, being a mother 24 hours a day, 7 days a week started to feel like my entire identity. Ethan was still wonderful. He was attentive, loving, and involved. The problem wasn't that he made me feel invisible. Somehow, I had started feeling invisible to the rest of the world, and eventually, even to myself. And the whole thing started in the most innocent way imaginable. I occasionally posted family pictures on Instagram, mostly so relatives and friends could keep up with us and see how quickly the kids were growing. One evening, while Ethan was giving the kids their bath, a notification popped up on my phone. It was a private message from a guy named Blake. He had replied to one of the beach pictures I'd posted from our summer vacation. He told me I had a beautiful family and said I looked way too young to already have 2 children. It was such a basic compliment. Nothing special. The kind of message I probably should have ignored without thinking twice. But when I read it, I felt this little rush inside me. So I clicked on his profile. Blake was 27. He had that effortless kind of attractiveness that looked like he barely had to try. His feed was filled with pictures from hiking trips, concerts, and music festivals. Everything about his life seemed spontaneous and free. I should have simply liked his comment and moved on with my evening. Instead, I sent back a laughing emoji and made some playful comment about flattering me getting him anywhere. That was how we started talking. Before long, we were texting every day. At first, there was nothing particularly inappropriate about our conversations. He'd ask how my day was going, and I'd ask him about his work as a graphic designer. It felt casual. But surprisingly quickly, those conversations became something I looked forward to more than almost anything else in my day. I started checking my phone constantly. Whenever Ethan was nearby, I found excuses to step away or turn the screen so he couldn't see it. It's just work. I'm checking something from Sophie's school. The excuses came out so naturally that it scared me how easy lying had become. Ethan eventually noticed something was different. He asked if I was okay because I seemed distracted lately. Instead of getting angry or suspicious, he started putting even more effort into us. He planned more date nights. Sometimes he'd come home with flowers for absolutely no reason. And somehow, the harder Ethan tried, the guiltier I felt. Strangely enough, that guilt didn't push me away from Blake. It seemed to pull me toward him even more. Ethan represented responsibility, history, family, and the life we had spent years building together. Blake represented excitement and something completely new. Around him, I felt young again. I felt noticed. I felt wanted as Natalie, not simply as someone's wife or someone's mother. After several weeks of increasingly intense messages, Blake suggested that we meet for coffee. I convinced myself there was nothing wrong with it. We were just 2 friends meeting for a cup of coffee. That was the story I told myself. But I still lied to Ethan. I told him I had a work meeting over lunch. The moment I saw Blake in person, everything changed. He was even more charming face to face. When I spoke, he actually listened. He'd lean slightly toward me, giving me his complete attention like nothing else in the room mattered. At one point, we both reached for the sugar and our hands brushed against each other. It was barely anything, but I felt a spark I hadn't experienced in years. That first coffee turned into another meeting the following week. Then we had lunch together. After that came a walk through the park. Every time we met, another boundary seemed to disappear. Our first kiss happened inside his car. Immediately afterward, I told myself it would never happen again. I convinced myself that maybe I had needed that one moment to get whatever this was out of my system. I would go home to Ethan, forget Blake, and put everything I had back into my marriage. That was what I promised myself. Instead, I became better at lying. I joined a gym I barely ever went to because it gave me an excuse to leave the house. I invented nights out with girlfriends Ethan didn't really know. Sometimes I claimed I was staying late at work when I had actually left early. And through all of this, Ethan continued being the same devoted husband he had always been. He would have dinner waiting when I supposedly came home from the gym. On Saturday mornings, he'd take care of the kids so I could sleep a little longer. Except sometimes I wasn't sleeping. I was lying in bed texting Blake. One evening, Ethan surprised me with tickets to a concert I had casually mentioned wanting to see months earlier. He had remembered. We stood there together listening to the music, his arm wrapped protectively around me, and for a while everything almost felt normal again. Then Ethan went to get us drinks. The second he walked away, I pulled out my phone and messaged Blake, telling him how bored I was. By then, I had become frighteningly good at dividing my life into separate pieces. Ethan and the kids were my real world. They were stability, love, history, and everything permanent in my life. Blake was my fantasy. He was exciting, unpredictable, and temporary. At least, that was what I kept telling myself. But eventually those two worlds started bleeding into each other. I began comparing Ethan to Blake without even meaning to. Ethan's jokes, the same kind that had made me laugh for years, suddenly seemed corny compared with Blake's sharper sense of humor. Ethan's dependable Honda somehow started looking boring beside Blake's sports car. Even Ethan's familiar touch, which had once made me feel safe and comfortable, started feeling ordinary compared with the adrenaline I associated with doing something forbidden. And the worst part was that Ethan could sense me pulling away. So he tried even harder. He kept asking what was wrong. He wanted to know whether there was anything he could do for me or anything he needed to change. His genuine concern made me feel like an absolute monster. Instead of telling him the truth, I compensated by pretending everything was wonderful. I became overly affectionate and enthusiastic, hoping it would convince him that nothing was wrong. All it really did was make my entire life feel even more dishonest. Eventually, even the kids started noticing. One day Sophie looked at me and asked, "Mom, why are you always on your phone?" Hearing that from my 6-year-old made my stomach tighten with shame. I kept promising myself I would end things with Blake. Tomorrow. Next week. After one more conversation. After one final meeting. There was always another excuse. And every time I saw him, I became more addicted to the way I felt when I was around him. The truth was, Ethan wasn't the only person I was deceiving. I was lying to myself. Little by little, I was turning into exactly the kind of person I had always believed I could never become. Selfish. Dishonest. Reckless. Yet I continued finding ways to justify it. I told myself that what Ethan didn't know couldn't hurt him. I told myself I deserved to feel this excitement again. Somehow, I even convinced myself that I could keep my wonderful family while maintaining this secret life on the side. Eventually, though, texting Blake wasn't enough anymore. One afternoon, while I was folding laundry, a message from him appeared on my phone. He said he needed to see me. And this time, he made it clear he wasn't talking about another innocent coffee. I knew exactly what he meant. Every alarm bell in my head was telling me to stop, but underneath the fear and guilt was another feeling I couldn't ignore. Excitement. We arranged to meet at a hotel in a neighboring town, somewhere we believed nobody would recognize either of us. Once again, I lied to Ethan. I told him some old college friends were passing through town and that I was meeting them for dinner. That night at the hotel, I crossed the final physical boundary I had spent years believing I would never cross. I had been faithful to Ethan for our entire relationship. And in one night, that was gone. What shocked me most afterward wasn't the guilt. The guilt came eventually. What frightened me was that, at first, I barely felt guilty at all. Instead, I felt alive. I felt wanted. It was almost as though I had rediscovered some forgotten part of myself that had been asleep for years. Blake made me feel things I hadn't felt with Ethan in a long time. Or maybe that wasn't entirely fair. Maybe those feelings were still possible with Ethan, but I had stopped allowing myself to experience them because my mind was constantly occupied with children, laundry, schedules, groceries, and everything else that came with our everyday life. Either way, I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. And that first night at the hotel didn't remain a one-time mistake. It became a regular thing. Every couple of weeks, I invented another elaborate excuse to get away. Sometimes I claimed there was a work event. Other times, I said I was going shopping with friends or treating myself to a spa day. Ethan never questioned any of it. He trusted me completely, and that trust made sneaking around almost ridiculously easy. Even when I came home later than expected, he never interrogated me or demanded an explanation. He would simply ask if I'd had a good time and tell me there was dinner waiting for me. His kindness should have made me stop. Instead, somehow, I became even better at separating what I was doing from the reality of my life. Blake and I also started becoming careless. Eventually, we stopped using protection. He told me it felt better that way, and as stupid as it sounds now, even the danger of it added to the excitement. "I want to feel all of you," he told me. And like an idiot, I agreed. He finished inside me, and instead of immediately panicking about the possible consequences, I felt this twisted sense of intimacy from the fact that we were taking such a huge risk together. It was like I had stepped into an alternate reality where consequences simply didn't exist. The physical side of our relationship also made me feel more emotionally connected to him. At least, that was true for me. Afterward, we would lie together and talk about places we could travel someday and imagine what our lives might look like under completely different circumstances. Blake never exactly promised me anything. He was much more subtle than that. Instead, he tempted me with possibilities. "We'll go to Barcelona someday," he'd say. "We'll stay out all night at those clubs you keep talking about." I held onto every word. In my head, I started building this imaginary future with him while deliberately ignoring the life waiting for me back home. The strange thing was, Blake never actually asked me to leave Ethan. Everything was always vague. Someday. Maybe. What if? Meanwhile, Ethan remained exactly what he had always been, stable, dependable, and everything I once believed I wanted in a husband. He planned movie nights with the kids. When the sink started leaking, he remembered to call the plumber without me having to remind him. On weekends, he sometimes brought me coffee in bed. And while he was doing all of that, I was living for the adrenaline rush of secret messages from Blake. I checked my phone constantly. I changed the password to something Ethan didn't know. Whenever Ethan sat beside me, I instinctively tilted my screen away from him. I became paranoid. Every day, I felt nervous and convinced I was about to get caught. But somehow, even that wasn't enough to make me stop. Eventually, my close friend Rachel noticed something had changed. "You haven't seemed like yourself lately," she told me while we were having lunch. "Are you and Ethan okay?" I casually waved off the question, but even my reaction felt fake to me. "We're fine. We're just busy with the kids." Rachel gave me a look that made it obvious she didn't completely believe me, but she didn't push the issue. Later that day, she sent me a message. "Whatever is happening, be careful. Are you and Ethan really okay?" I deleted the message immediately. For some reason, I was irritated that she was implying I might be doing something wrong, even though I knew perfectly well that I was. As I continued pulling away, Ethan only tried harder to bring us closer. He suggested more date nights. He planned a weekend trip for our anniversary. He bought me thoughtful little gifts. I responded with exaggerated enthusiasm while secretly comparing everything he did to the excitement Blake gave me. Ethan's stability, Something I had once treasured started feeling boring instead of comforting. And Blake's unpredictability, which should have bothered me, became part of the attraction. I was behaving like an addict. I kept choosing the temporary rush of secrecy and excitement over the stable marriage I had spent years building. And somehow, I couldn't see that I was slowly setting fire to everything that actually mattered. Then Ethan surprised me with an anniversary getaway. "I already talked to your parents. They're taking the kids," he said as he showed me the reservation for a boutique hotel about 3 hours away. "Just you and me. No distractions." My first reaction should have been gratitude. Instead, I panicked. Not because I didn't want to spend time with my husband, but because I suddenly realized I wouldn't be able to see or freely message Blake for an entire weekend. What kind of person had I become? I texted Blake about my upcoming forced romantic weekend with Ethan, secretly hoping he would show at least a little jealousy. Instead, his response was strangely distant. "Have a good time," he wrote several hours later. "We'll talk when you get back." That was it. He didn't say he would miss me. He didn't hint at what we might do once I returned. Nothing. I spent the drive to the hotel checking my phone every few minutes, desperate for another message. Once again, I felt like an addict waiting for the next hit. The hotel itself was perfect. Months earlier, I had casually mentioned that I wanted to stay somewhere with a huge bathtub, and Ethan had remembered. He booked us massages, reserved a table at a beautiful restaurant, and even stopped on the way to pick up my favorite snacks. Every thoughtful thing he did made the guilt cut deeper. This man knew me. He loved me. He had spent years building a life with me and constantly thinking about ways to make me happy. And I was risking all of it for secret hotel meetings with a man who couldn't even pretend to be excited about seeing me after the weekend. For a brief time during that trip, something inside me shifted. I actually felt close to Ethan again. We laughed during dinner and talked about the early days of our relationship. Later, we fell asleep wrapped around each other. For the first time in months, I remembered exactly why I had fallen in love with him. With Ethan, I felt safe. I felt needed. More importantly, I felt understood in a way Blake could probably never understand me. On our second night there, we were intimate, and for once, I was completely present with my husband instead of letting my mind drift somewhere else. Afterward, Ethan pulled me close. "It feels like I've been losing you lately," he whispered. "Whatever is happening, we can deal with it together." There was so much sincerity in his voice that I almost broke down right there. For a second, I came dangerously close to telling him everything. Instead, I mumbled something about being stressed and overwhelmed from work and the kids. I hated myself for lying to him again. But I was terrified of what would happen if I finally told him the truth. When we returned home, Blake's strange coldness continued. Sometimes he went hours without answering me. The effortless conversations we used to have were replaced by short, almost dismissive responses. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt a surge of anxiety and hope so intense that it actually frightened me. I had slept with this man. I had risked my marriage and potentially damaged my relationship with my children for him. Yet, suddenly, I was realizing something terrifying. I barely knew Blake at all. And if a few distant messages from him could affect me this badly, what did that say about what I had become? My desperation for his attention made me even more careless. I started messaging him while Ethan was sitting in the same room. I still hid my screen, but I couldn't even wait until I was alone anymore. I also started inventing increasingly ridiculous excuses to meet Blake. Some of the lies were so obvious that I still can't believe Ethan didn't confront me. I supposedly went to yoga 3 times in 1 week. Another time, I claimed I was getting coffee with Rachel even though Ethan had literally heard me turn down Rachel's invitation on the phone the day before. If Ethan suspected anything, he kept it to himself. And instead of seeing his silence as a warning, I treated it like permission to become even more reckless. Not long after that, Ethan planned another special evening for us. His sister agreed to keep the kids overnight, which almost never happened with our hectic life and 2 young children. Ethan cooked my favorite meal, opened a nice bottle of wine, and even put together a playlist filled with songs we used to listen to when we were younger. I tried to match his excitement, but mentally, I was somewhere else. All I could think about was why Blake hadn't responded to the message I had sent him around lunchtime. Ethan deserved my full attention, especially after everything he had done to make that evening special. But I couldn't give it to him. Physically, I was sitting right there beside my husband. Emotionally, I was chained to my phone and obsessed with a relationship that was obviously beginning to cool down. Later that night, once we had the house completely to ourselves, Ethan initiated intimacy. I responded almost automatically, going through familiar motions while my mind wandered somewhere else. And then something changed. I closed my eyes. Suddenly, in my imagination, Ethan disappeared. I was with Blake instead. The fantasy became so vivid and consuming that for a few moments, I genuinely lost track of where I was and who I was actually with. Then I made the mistake that changed everything. At the most intimate moment, completely lost in that fantasy, I whispered Blake's name. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. And the instant the name left my mouth, I knew exactly what I had done. My eyes snapped open. Ethan had completely frozen. I watched the expression on his face change in real time. First there was confusion, then realization, and finally, something that looked almost like horror. I immediately started saying Ethan's name over and over, louder each time, desperately pretending that somehow repeating it could erase the name he had just heard. But there was no taking it back. It was already too late. Ethan immediately pulled away from me and sat down on the edge of the bed with his back turned. The silence that followed felt deafening. Who the hell is Blake? Ethan's voice was so quiet that it scared me more than if he had been yelling. The bedroom suddenly felt freezing cold. My mind went into overdrive, desperately searching for an explanation that could somehow save me. A coworker. A character from some show we had watched. An old friend. Anyone except the truth. But judging by the panic written all over my face, I think Ethan already knew the answer. It's not what you think, I muttered, pulling the sheet tightly against my chest. Ethan slowly turned toward me. The pain in his eyes was unbearable. In all the years we had been together, I could barely remember seeing him cry. But now tears were running down his face. Answer me, Natalie. Who is Blake? His voice shook as he spoke, and seeing him like that made me physically sick. This was a man who had loved me completely, and I was watching him realize what I had done to him. He's just someone from work, I lied. Even my voice sounded weak. It doesn't mean anything. I don't even know why I said his name. The excuse sounded pathetic even to me. Ethan stood up and started getting dressed, his hands visibly trembling. Give me your phone. What? No. I grabbed it from the nightstand and instinctively held it close to myself. You don't trust me? Ethan let out a bitter laugh that felt like a slap across my face. Trust you? You just said another man's name while you were in bed with me, and now you're asking whether I trust you. He held out his hand. Give me the damn phone. I hesitated because I knew exactly what he would find if he got inside it. This is ridiculous, I said. You're completely overreacting. His expression hardened. I'm overreacting? His voice grew louder with every word. After everything I've done for this family, for you, this is what I get? He held out his hand again. Give me the phone. Eventually, I handed it over. But the screen stayed locked. Ethan stared at it for a moment before looking back at me. The expression on his face had changed. There was pain there, but now there was also disappointment and disgust. Unlock it. I don't like the way you're talking to me right now, I said, desperately trying to shift the focus onto his behavior. You don't need to yell at me or swear. Unlock the phone. This time his voice was almost frighteningly calm. No, that's an invasion of my privacy. Even as I said it, I knew how absurd it sounded. I wasn't protecting my privacy. I was protecting my lies. Ethan gave another empty laugh. Privacy? That's what you're worried about right now. He looked down at the phone. I'm paying for this damn thing, so technically, I have every right to know what's going on. Ethan, you're scaring me, I said, making one final attempt to make him feel guilty. I don't like this side of you. He looked straight at me. And I don't like this side of you. Then he paused. Actually, I don't even know who you are anymore. Those words hit harder than anything else he had said. He slipped my phone into his pocket. If you're cheating on me, our marriage is over. You can start thinking about packing your things. Right now, I need you to leave me alone and let me think. I knew I was guilty. And I knew there was enough evidence on that phone to destroy every lie I had told him. So, for once, I had nothing to say. Ethan stormed out of the bedroom with my phone. By the next morning, he had started piecing everything together. Using information connected to our shared phone account, he found records showing hundreds of messages and calls to the same number, often at the exact times I had claimed I was working late or spending time with friends. From there, he started checking our shared credit card statements and other accounts we both had access to. He found hotel charges and other transactions that placed me nowhere near the places I had claimed to be. Piece by piece, my entire secret life became visible. When Ethan came back, he silently placed everything he had found on the table. Then he asked me one final time to tell him the truth. That was when I broke. I admitted I had been unfaithful. But even then, I still tried to minimize it. I insisted it had only been physical and that Blake meant nothing to me. That was another lie. I just couldn't bring myself to admit how emotionally attached I had become. Ethan asked how long it had been happening. Then he asked whether Blake and I had always used protection. My hesitation before answering told him everything. His face turned red as the full extent of what I had done finally sank in. This wasn't only about betrayal anymore. I had also taken risks that could affect his health without ever giving him a choice. Ethan packed a bag. He called his brother and arranged to stay with him. Before leaving, he told me that from then on, we would only communicate about the children and the divorce. 2 weeks after our separation, I started noticing symptoms that worried me. I went to the doctor, and the test confirmed exactly what I had been afraid of. I had chlamydia. Calling Ethan and telling him was one of the worst conversations of my life. After I gave him the news, there was a long, cold silence. Then he hung up. That final revelation seemed to destroy whatever tiny piece of trust might still have survived. I hadn't only threatened his peace of mind. My decisions had potentially put his physical health at risk, too. From that point on, everything seemed to collapse even faster. The infection became another painful detail surrounding our divorce. People in our social circle learned enough about what had happened that some of them began distancing themselves from me. A few former friends even stopped arranging playdates involving my children. And Blake? The moment I told him about the infection, he practically disappeared. Our messages stopped. He stopped answering my calls and eventually blocked me completely. After everything I had risked for him, he removed himself from my life without so much as a proper goodbye. 3 months later, I'm sitting in a small 2-bedroom apartment by myself. Ethan has the kids most of the time. I see them on weekends and sometimes during the week. The separation and temporary custody arrangement didn't go the way I had hoped. For now, that arrangement would remain in place while our lawyers worked through the details of the divorce. He was the devoted father who had been blindsided by his wife's reckless behavior. And I was the one who had blown up our family for an affair. The worst part was that I couldn't even tell myself that description was completely unfair. My phone buzzes. It's a message from Ethan. He tells me he's taking the kids out for pizza and a movie tonight. Then he says Sophie needs her blue sweater for school on Monday and asks me to find it. That's what our relationship has become. Schedules. Clothes. School. Pickup times. Practical information about the kids. Nothing else. He never asks how I'm doing. He doesn't tell me he hopes I'm okay. All those little kindnesses that once seemed so ordinary disappeared the night I whispered another man's name in our bed. And I didn't only lose my marriage. Friends pulled away once they learned the ugly details of what I had done. My parents had always adored Ethan, and now they barely bother hiding their disappointment in me. Even conversations with my sister have changed. She talks about the kids and family logistics, but rarely asks how I'm handling any of this. Eventually, word about what had happened reached people at work. I started noticing the whispers and the looks, and after a while, I requested a transfer to another department because I couldn't stand being around people who knew what I had done. Last week, I took the kids to their favorite restaurant for dinner. We were almost finished eating when Ethan walked in with some friends. Our eyes met from across the room. And in that moment, I felt something that hurt worse than his anger ever had. Nothing. There was absolutely no warmth left between us. But there wasn't anger either. No visible resentment. Just emptiness. Ethan politely nodded in my direction, came over briefly to speak with the kids, and then walked to his table. His indifference hurt more than being yelled at ever could. That might be the hardest part of all of this. Ethan was everything I used to claim I wanted in a partner. He was attentive, loyal, hardworking. He was an incredible father. He planned dates and remembered anniversaries. He supported my career and did his share around the house. He loved me completely until I finally gave him a reason not to. And I threw all of that away for someone who ultimately treated me as disposable. To Blake, I was excitement. A distraction. Something entertaining that existed outside his normal life. Sometimes I still try to defend myself in my own head. I tell myself Blake manipulated me. I remind myself that marriage can be difficult. I tell myself I felt invisible and taken for granted. But even to me, those excuses sound hollow now. The truth is both simpler and much harder to accept. I made a long series of selfish decisions. Again and again, I put what I wanted in that moment ahead of the well-being of my family. I repeatedly lied to the person who trusted me more than anyone else. And without giving it enough thought, I took risks that could affect my husband's health. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't said Blake's name that night. Maybe I would still be living my supposedly perfect life. Maybe eventually I would have ended things with Blake, returned completely to my husband, and buried the secret forever. Or maybe the truth would have come out anyway. Perhaps another careless mistake would have exposed everything eventually. I'll never know. What I do know is that I'm living with the consequences now. And the regret follows me everywhere. But there's an even uglier truth underneath all of that, one I rarely allow myself to acknowledge. Sometimes I wonder whether I regret cheating because of what it did to Ethan or because I got caught. Sometimes I wonder whether I miss Ethan himself or whether I really miss the comfortable life, family, security, and status that came with being his wife. And if I could somehow go back in time, would I actually stop myself from starting the affair? Or would I simply be more careful about hiding it? That is the part of myself I hate looking at. It's the truth I can only admit during those dark hours when I'm lying awake alone. Everyone sees me differently now. To them, I'm selfish, reckless, dishonest, untrustworthy. For a long time, I wanted to believe they were seeing some distorted version of me created by the worst mistake of my life. But maybe they aren't. Maybe this is who I was all along. And now I have to live with the consequences of finally being seen clearly.